Welcome
to the Michael Smerconish program.
Refreshingly independent politics.
Exclusively on SiriusXM's POTUS Channel 124.
Clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right. Here I am, stuck in the middle with you.
Now, here's Michael Smerconish.
Hello. Let us do this. TC, don't let me leave here today without giving you a review of Bill Burr in Atlantic City, who I saw on Saturday night.
I need a review of that. I
lot of
cannot
fun.
wait for that.
A lot of fun.
Oh, boy.
Totally politically incorrect. Which makes for great comedy. As long as you're an equal opportunity offender, I think it's great stuff. Next hour, we'll get into the de-churching of America, a new book arguing that we're in the midst of the largest and fastest religious shift in U.S. history. 40 million have left the church in the last 25 years. Are you one of them, and why, and will you ever go back? You'll meet the author of a provocative new book with a lot of good data on that subject. Also, another week of record temperatures across the country, or is it? Climatologist Michael Mann, the originator of the so-called hockey stick analysis. Dr. Michael Mann, truly one of the giants in the field of climate science, will be here in the third hour of the program. And I'm eager to welcome him back to the program because I want him to respond to a Wall Street Journal essay that ran over the weekend that says that average global temperatures is a meaningless analysis. So that ought to be a great conversation. But I want you to know this up front today. Today's poll question at Smerconish.com was inspired by my next guest. The poll question on this Monday asks, to instill more fairness and equity in college admissions, should the nation's most prestigious universities dramatically expand their enrollment? In just a few minutes' time, Professor G. Scott Galloway will come back to us. He from New York University Stern School of Business. Scott Galloway is often a guest of mine on CNN. This past Saturday, he was not a guest, but he was a viewer. By the way, great for my demographics. Thank you for that, Professor G. But what caught his eye and his ear was a commentary that I hosted, that I delivered, and then hosted a guest talking about the recent Supreme Court decision that ended race-based admissions, which then resulted in a new legal challenge to legacy admissions. And my guest was a lecturer at UCLA School of Law named Sanford Williams. Kind of interesting because Sanford Williams is himself, as his wife is, a UVA graduate, and they have 3 children who are UVA graduates, and they look forward, they hope, to the day when their grandchildren can go to UVA. But my guest was there to say that before last week, before the Supreme Court got rid of race-based college admissions, he was supportive of legacy admissions, meaning that his grandchildren, arguably as his own 3 children, had been given somewhat of an advantage, that would also be the case for his grandchildren, but now he's got a different position on that. So me, A, because I believe it, and B, wanting to be provocative, I came on CNN on Saturday morning and I said, here are my words in beginning the segment. I said, and now an endorsement of legacy college admissions from a 61-year-old white, now suburbanite, former fraternity brother, and perhaps if I'm acknowledging all of my stereotypes, I should throw in that I am bald. And then I tried to make the case for legacy admissions by saying, they're not as bad as they've been made out to be, and there are actually some virtues, and included in the virtues are the fact that they instill this sort of tradition and family and loyalty and obligation that results in individuals writing checks and being there to conduct alumni interviews and being perpetual ambassadors for whatever university they graduated from. And I told the story of having recently been back at my alma mater, Lehigh University, for a 39th reunion. Who goes to the 39th? Like, not many people, right? Because people hold out for the 40th or, God willing, the 50th. And I noted that at the 39th were a number of my classmates and my fraternity brothers who have sons and daughters who have since gone to Lehigh, which makes my point that, yes, they're the ones who come out to the 39th. Because that's what legacy admissions instill. and also the ability to then fund the college tuition of less fortunate individuals who are the beneficiaries of scholarship. So that was the pitch that I made, and I was thrilled to find out later that watching was Scott Galloway. Professor G is a professor of marketing at the NYU Stern School of Business. I refer to him as Professor G because he is not only a serial entrepreneur, but he's the host of a very successful podcast called the Professor G Podcast. And by the way, has written multiple best-selling books, but I highly recommend the most recent of them, which is called Adrift: America in 100 Charts. So Scott has inspired today's poll question. I hope I did right by him with the wording. I am asking this: to instill more fairness and equity in admissions, should the nation's most prestigious universities dramatically expand their enrollment? This is Professor G. This is Professor Scott Galloway. By the way, Scott, how did I do? I tried to be fair to you based on the conversation we had offline. How did I do in actually writing the embodiment of what you're here to argue?
First off, it was great to be with you, Michael, and thanks for having me on. I called you and asked to come on because I thought that you were pretty bold to call out that legacy admissions actually have a positive, realizing you get a lot of hate for that. The question cuts exactly to the solution, and that is America is more interested in being angry at each other than actually focusing on the solution, and the solution is more, and that is, if you look at the 4,000 degree granting institutions in the United States, 3,800, maybe 3,900 don't have an affirmative action problem because they have to go find students. They have more supply than they have demand. It's the top 100 elite universities where affirmative action inspires such a really, really difficult and emotional conversation, because a degree from an elite institution in the United States is like taking a pill that guarantees you a job, makes you more likely to get married, run for office, less likely to be obese, less likely to die from early onset dementia, diabetes. It really is a miracle cure. So why would you hoard a miracle cure? And the answer is you have absolutely no justification. It is morally corrupt what me and my colleagues have executed, the business strategy over the last 40 years. And that business strategy is the following. We've decided we're a luxury brand, not public servants. When I applied to UCLA, the acceptance rate was 76%. It is now 9%.
Wow.
And this is effectively the path that every elite university has followed, because the way to create irrational margins is through artificial scarcity. And so what you have is an institution like Harvard, where if you stack the endowment in $100 bills, the Virgin Galactic Orbital 1 wouldn't clear it. They have the GDP of a small nation in the form of their endowment, and yet they only let in 1,500 kids a year, despite the fact that 55,000 applied. And they'll come up with these BS reasons that we don't have the capacity. Of course they have the capacity with online learning, with those kinds of resources. They could open satellite campuses all over the nation. So what you have is a miracle drug that's being hoarded. And ask any parent of any college senior that's applying to an elite school this year, that hoarding of a miracle drug creates chaos and anger. So rather than focus on who should get advantage and who shouldn't, the answer is simple. The answer is more. It's not which students, it's more students. It's more kids of color, it's more white kids, it's more men, it's more women, it's more trans kids, it's more legacy kids. And if we get to a point where we refuse to let universities throw up their arms and pretend that there is anything less than a morally corrupt strategy here around unnecessarily creating artificial constraints on supply, it's a giant misdirect. The problem isn't who we let in. The problem that we need to attack should be we need to let in more.
So I have a number of reactions, the first of which is that many who are listening, I think, will be of the opinion that the most prestigious, so-called, of these degrees are not what they're cracked up to be. And then they'll look at data that says that more CEOs of Fortune 500 companies come from state schools, or at least non-Ivy League schools, so that parents put their kids in this position of competing for these precious few slots. And in the end, it doesn't matter. But the first thing that you said that caught my ear is, no, it really does matter, because the data suggests that if you can graduate from one of these schools, your life is going to be better off.
I think we tell ourselves a story about college doesn't matter and there's no difference between elite schools and non-elite schools, because I think we're just so frustrated and heartbroken when our kid who's a good kid, or our friends' kids who are good kids, play by the rules, do a great job, play sports, study hard, and then get arbitraged down from a Tier 1 school to a Tier 2 school that engages in the cartel price fixing that makes OPEC look amateur, and end up having to take out huge student loans to go to, quite frankly, a Tier 2 university that doesn't have the brand equity, the certification, the faculty, or the opportunities. If you go to Dartmouth, for the rest of your life, you are taken seriously globally. You can get a job in almost any city globally. You can find a mate more easily, because just by saying I went to Dartmouth says you are a responsible person who either comes from a good family, unfortunately, or is already wealthy, or is just very, very good at what you do. So to think that we do a few things really, really well in America. We make by far the best weapons, the best software, the best media of men in tights with capes, and we also, hands down, have the best elite universities in the world. These are the strongest brands in the world. The strongest brands in the world aren't Apple and Google. The strongest brands in the world are MIT and Stanford. No one's going to give $300 million to Apple to get their name on the side of a building on the Apple campus. These are incredible institutions. And the question is, if you had this amazing homeless shelter that could help people get off the streets, and for every one person that was getting into the program and getting off the streets, you had 9 who wanted in, wouldn't you expand that product? If you had a social service that helped veterans get back on their feet, and there was 9 to 1 people who got into the program, wouldn't you expand that? So my proposal is the student loan bailout was, I think, correctly rejected by the Supreme Court. So the question is, with $500 billion, what could you do? The student loan bailout shrunk the tumor, but it didn't go after the cancer. The cancer here is access, or lack thereof, of this incredible life-saving drug. So what you could do with that $500 billion, go to the 500 largest public universities, that's a third of them, offer them $1 billion each, size adjusted, in exchange for a few things. One, they're going to lower through their costs through investments in infrastructure and technology. They're going to lower their tuition 2% a year. They're going to increase supply 6% a year. And they all complain they're supply constrained. They're not. I can tell you as a prof who's been teaching for 20 years, their dirty secret is a third to half our classes, our sessions could be put online with no erosion in quality. Increase supply by 6% a year, freshman seats, and 20% of degrees granted have to be non-4-year liberal arts vocational certifications, cybersecurity, nursing, specialty construction. Where does that get us in 10 years for $500 billion? Double the number of freshman seats at half the cost on an inflation-adjusted basis, and more opportunity, more on-ramps to the middle class for young American youth, specifically males, who live in a nation where only 5% of our populace have some sort of vocational certification versus 50% in Germany, because we've decided in the U.S. it's the Hunger Games, and if your kid doesn't get into an elite college, you and your parents have failed.
Scott Galloway is a professor of marketing at the NYU Stern School of Business. His podcast is the Professor G Podcast. Read his most recent release, which is called Adrift: America in 50 Charts. Okay, you're the business school professor. I'm just the talk show host. But isn't what you're saying at odds with the scarcity notion? Meaning, if all of a sudden lots of people get to go to Stanford or Harvard or Dartmouth, then the value of that degree will be diminished.
This is the brand erosion argument. And quite frankly, Michael, it's total BS. So see above, when I applied to UCLA, it was 76%. It wasn't exactly a Joey Bag of Donuts brand. It was one of the best brands in the world with 76% admissions. And here's the thing. Every organization has brand associations. And the brand association around UCLA was that it was a jewel. The University of California was a crown jewel of California. That was about people's futures. That was about falling in love with unremarkable kids. It was about giving the son of a single immigrant mother who lived and died a secretary and never had household income over $40,000, yours truly, a shot. I think those are pretty wonderful brand associations. And also we had the best sports teams in the world. It's not like it was some terrible brand that people didn't want to apply to. Now what they've decided is the most important brand attribute is to be like Louis Vuitton or Chanel and have scarcity at the core. And that's the problem, is that me and my colleagues wake up every morning and ask ourselves the same question. How do we increase our compensation while reducing our accountability? And we've adopted the ultimate strategy, and that is a luxury rejectionist NIMBYist strategy. Because if I'm an alum and it gets harder and harder to get into my school, the value of my college certificate goes up. The same thing is happening across housing in America with this NIMBYist attitude. If these brands, if elite colleges tripled or quadrupled their freshman seats, it would have absolutely no impact on brand. The Harvard director of admissions says openly, we could double or triple our class size and not have any erosion in the quality of the applicants. So the question then is, well, if you're sitting on $53 billion, why wouldn't you, boss? So this brand erosion argument just doesn't hold water.
By the way, Bill Fitzsimmons, who was the dean of admissions at Harvard, once said that to me. I had exactly that conversation. And he said that, you know, the next level of those who we have to reject are frankly indistinguishable from those that we're accepting, which makes your point. Okay, one other argument for Professor G. What impact, though, would this have on the next tier of schools? Because if all of a sudden the most prestigious expand their ranks, then a lot are going to all of a sudden suffer, right?
And some should go out of business. Some are schools that charge the kind of price of a Mercedes for a Hyundai experience. And if a bunch of kids are able to afford a Mercedes for a Mercedes price, I think that that's a good idea. But what we're probably talking about here is not that a lot of schools would go out of business. It's just that we would have more kids in college and ideally more kids pursuing non-traditional four-year. We need to stop fetishizing the four-year liberal arts degree. Every company in the world has innovated. Look what's happened to our industry. The product from universities, one of the largest industries in America, the product hasn't changed in 50 years. It's still the four-year traditional liberal arts degrees. We should have all sorts of certification and degrees. I think what you'd have is an expansion in opportunity, not a lot of universities going out of business. And quite frankly, if our best universities, our best public universities dramatically expand their roles, and universities that are putting kids $100 or $200 grand in debt for a mediocre degree from a mediocre institution, then welcome to the work week. They should go out of business.
Okay, finally, sum up. What's the takeaway you want to leave with us as we contemplate today's poll question to instill more fairness and equity in admissions? Should the nation's most prestigious universities dramatically expand their enrollment? Scott Galloway says,
exponentially expand our enrollment, and Americans need to start focusing on what brings us together. People on the far right want to take us back to old Spain and create this, this feeling of racism and anger, and people on the far left are more interested in being wokesters as opposed to warriors fighting the actual problem. The problem isn't who gets in. The issue and the correct question is more. Simply put, more. We can scale any tech company 40% a year. We can scale the University of North Carolina and Lehigh by 6% a year. More trans kids, more kids of color, more legacy admissions, more supply. This is a life-saving drug. Me and my colleagues need to stop hoarding it.
Stop hoarding the miracle. Scott, that was excellent. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you reached out.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks for your good work and how courageous you are around this issue.
Okay. I'm not sure I am, but okay. I'm like you. This is the way that I see it, and somebody's going to be offended, but that's not going to hold me back. So thank you, Scott. Scott Galloway, excellent as always. Okay, of course, I'm going to go to the phones in just a moment on this. Stop hoarding the miracle cure, he says. More is the answer. Call me and react to today's poll question at Smerconish.com to instill more fairness and equity in admissions. Should the nation's most prestigious universities dramatically expand their enrollment? Scott says that is the answer to this admissions debate that was initially on race-based admissions and now has moved to legacy admissions. Why aren't these better schools just letting more in and letting others have a taste of the miracle cure that they are hoarding? I'm at 855-486-1776. Are your memories stuffed in a drawer or sitting in a musty box somewhere? I'm talking about the old movies, the old photos, the clunky videos that you shot of your